The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
It brings us all together. And when we do music together, often Jesse will be the one playing the drum, and I'll pick up a rattle, and we'll do something like this, which is a welcoming song that calls people into the circle.
Yoguano de yoguano da. Yoguano de yoguano da. Gayoani he hayokyo he. Gayoani he hayokyo he. Gayoani he hayokyo he. Gayoani he hayokyo he. Hayogano de yogano da. Hayogano de yogano da. Gayoani he hayokyo he. Gayoani he hayokyo he. Gayoani he hayokyo he. Gayoani he hayokyo he. Hayogano de yogano da.
And the haunted house seems to be the perfect one. It's supposed to be, according to Richard Chase in his notes that he looked, the oldest story, haunted house story in America. It's like one of the first ones that probably came over from Europe, and was changed in different ways and made into a real, genuine American story. So I'll tell that for you now. Because not only is it the first haunted house story in America, it's the first one I ever told. One time there was a preacher, and he wanted to see if he could banish a ghost from a house in his settlement. This house had been haunted about 10 years, and several people tried to stay there all night because, you know, if you stay all night in a haunted house, it gets rid of that haunting spirit. Well, several people, man, woman, children, families, had tried, but all had been scared out by the ghost around midnight. Well, this preacher was a brave man. He said, yes, I'll do it. And he went on up to that house with his Bible in his hand. He went on in, and you can picture what that haunted house looked like. It was gray, and the windows were broken out, and the door was off the hinges. And actually, when he pushed the door open, it was colder inside than it was outside. But he went in anyway, and he saw a huge fireplace, and there was some kindling and some newspapers, and he had some matches, and so he built himself a fire, found a big log. And pretty soon he had this big fire going in the fireplace, and he moved a chair close to it, and he opened up his Bible, and he started to read. He didn't have any trouble at all, just reading his Bible, until just before midnight, when he heard something in the cellar, going back and forth, and back and forth, and back. And then there's something started to scream and get choked off, and there's a lot of thrashing around and struggling. And finally everything got quiet again. Well, I told you this preacher was a brave man. Anybody else would be out of that house in 2 seconds flat. But he sat right back down, he opened up his Bible, and he started to read again. But he didn't get more than 2 sentences read before he heard that thing starting up the cellar stairs. Step, 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 till it was right outside the cellar door. Well, then that preacher, he did get scared, and he stood up, and he held his Bible out in front of him. The knob turned slowly, and the door opened wide. And that preacher, he said in a quiet voice, "Who are you? What is it you want?" Well, the ghost came right across the room, straight up to him, took hold of his coat lapels. It turned out to be a young woman about 20 years old. She smelled earthy. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face so he could see bones and part of her teeth. She didn't have no eyeballs, but there was a kind of a blue light way back in her eye sockets. And she had no nose to her face. Well, then she started talking. Sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing through it. Told him how her friend had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. Said if he'd dig up her bones and give her a Christian burial, she could rest. But then she told him not to bury all the bones. She told him to keep the end joint of the little finger of the left hand, just this little piece of bone right here. When he found it, he was to hold on to it till the next church meeting. Put it in the collection plate. And if anybody touched that finger bone who was guilty of the murder, you'd find out. And if you come back here once more, after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight. And I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church. And the ghost sobbed like it was tired and sank right down through the cellar floor. What else could that preacher do? He was terrified by this time, but he knew he had to obey the ghost. He had to do what the ghost told him to do. And so he found an oil lamp with a little bit of oil left in it, and he lit it by the flame from the fireplace. And he held it out just like this. And he started walking down the stairs, down those dark stairs, lighting only just a little patch as he went. And when he got down, he looked around and he saw bones flung all over the cellar. They were in every corner, and it took him all night, all the rest of the night, to gather up all those bones. It was dawn when he came up those stairs with those bones. And he took them right to the cemetery by the church, and he dug the grave himself. And he put her in the grave, and he prayed over her bones and her grave. But he didn't bury all the bones. He kept the end joint of the little finger, the left hand, just this piece. It took him a long time to find it, but when he did, he held on to it until the next church meeting. And that Sunday, when no one was looking, he put that finger bone in the church collection. And then he went out as usual to give his sermon, and they sang their song, and he sat back. And he looked at everybody in the church. And the collection plate was being passed up and down the aisles. He looked at each person who put his hand in that collection plate. And sure enough, when a certain man put his hand in that collection plate and touched that finger bone, it stuck to his hand. He rubbed and scraped and tore at that bone trying to get it off. He went to screaming like he was going crazy. And then they dragged him up to the front of the church right before the preacher. And he confessed the murder. He was taken off and tried and hung with that finger bone still stuck on his hand. Never did come off. But the preacher did go back to that house one midnight. Didn't see the ghost, but the ghost's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock by the fireplace. He did. He found a big sack full of gold and silver money. And he brought it to the church. And nobody ever heard tell of that ghost anymore. But the print of those bony fingers, when a ghost took hold of his coat lapels, was burnt right into the cloth. And that never did come out either. And that's the story of the haunted house.
It'll be a brief version of the story, and I'll start. Jesse will translate exactly what I do in English. A long time ago, or as we say in Abenaki,
Noat.
a long time ago, Gluskomba was out walking around.
Noat, the talker, Pomosat.
As he was walking around, he got an idea. The idea was that he would go and hunt for some ducks in the pond he saw in front of him.
Kwani agama pomosat u wadzonem uli mikawi da honzi. Agama udatsui nadi alon guiguigamak nibasisek.
So he began to paddle his canoe out to try to reach those ducks, but as he did so, a big wind blew him back to shore.
Agama pamibia wigwa olek kanwa kin lomsen guagwana agama sinolji wimina.
He tried this pazok, nis, nas, yao times.
Agama guaguadzo yo 1, 2, 3, 4 da.
And each time the wind blew him back, he was very unhappy, so he went right to the lodge where his grandmother and he lived together.
Kanwa kim lomsen mina ta agama pomosat wigwomek udzi okamasa.
He said to her, "Grandmother, I want to know what makes the wind blow."
Nokamas awani ulito ulomsen.
And his grandmother said, "Da, Pluskomba, I don't think I should tell you because whenever I tell you something, you get in trouble."
No talker and da and laudamo and nia kadihlon kia ni kia paligin.
But Pluskomba sat down in front of her and said, "Tell me why the wind blows, tell me why the wind blows, tell me why the wind blows, tell me why the wind blows."
Kadihlon olomsen, kadihlon olomsen, kadihlon olomsen, kadihlon olomsen.
His grandmother saw he was so stubborn, he would just keep saying that, and so she told him what made the wind blow.
Uawal damwen. Udzi ali niga okamasa kadihlon agama kinlomsen ulito.
She said, "There is a great bird on top of the tallest mountain. When he flaps his wings, it makes the wind blow."
Kitsi sibs nidali wadzok agama wil gwana ta ulito kinlomsen.
Oh, ligen nokumis idak luskomba. But how would I find the place where that wind eagle stands?
That is good, said the talker. Kanwa udzi ali nia miskawon agama kinlomsen kitsi sibs ska.
His grandmother said, "I'm not sure I should tell you that."
Inda and laudamwon nia kadihlon kiani.
But Gluskomba sat down, took a deep breath, and his grandmother said, "All right, I'll tell you."
Kanwa agama abi ta nasa kitsinasa okamas ida nia kadihlon kia.
So Gluskomba did as she said, which was to face into the wind and always walk facing the wind.
Liula damana ta onlawi la guiwi kinlomsenek ta pomosa nidali.
He went across the fields, through the forest, up the hill to the mountaintop.
Agama son sasa gosa kikonek ta wadzok.
That wind blew so hard, it blew off all his clothes.
Uzomi kin lomsen agama and da wadzonem ahimal.
It even blew all the hair off his head.
Anagita agama udep konalatsi.
Yeah, I've been there. And there was the wind eagle on top of that mountain. But he could go no further because the wind was too strong.
Agama mamasagi wi kanwa anda pomosa mina udziali nidali ska watsusen.
So Gluskomba called out, "Grandfather!"
Ma home!
And the wind eagle stopped flapping his wings and said, "Who called me grandfather?"
Awani lui nia ma home.
Gluskomba stood up and said, "I did, grandfather. I came up all this way to tell you you do a really good job of making the wind blow."
Agama skata ida nia pomosa yodali udziali kadihlon kia uli toki lomsen.
But I think you could do a better job on that other mountain over there.
Kanwa and laudam kia ulito nidali pa amigan.
And I will carry you over there.
Nia intopta kia nidali.
So Gluskomba went down the mountain and took a basswood tree's bark and made it into a strong carrying strap.
Agama losa nimska wakumo zeno ziabazi ta ulito ni.
He wrapped it around the wind eagle, picked him up and said, "Grandfather, now I'm going to take you to a better place."
Agama kalabido ni watsusen ta padon agama.
But as he walked along, he dropped the wind eagle in a crack between the mountains.
Agama benita sin wakta sin kadzigapskazo nansawiwi wadzoikok.
And said, "Ah, now it is a good day to go hunt ducks."
Nigwambi uligan udzi losanadi ali guiguimak.
He went back down the mountain, back down the hills, back through the trees, back across the fields.
Agama pedigo.
And when he got there, By the time he got there, all his hair had grown back, and he put on new clothing.
Tania dodzi agama paya, agama uwadzonem uski udepkonal, ta uski ahimalatsi.
And he began to paddle out to hunt ducks. But as he did so,
Monza pami bia odzi wigwolek, kanwa.
he noticed it was very hot and still. And there was foam all over the water.
Awa besko al nidali nebik,
It was hard to breathe.
onda nasa,
It was not a good day to hunt.
onda ulegiskat diwi.
So he went right back to the lodge of his grandmother and said, "Grandmother, what is wrong with the world? It's hot and still. It's hard to breathe. I'm covered with sweat. What is wrong?"
Agama pedigo wigwomek odzi okamasa ta ida kagwila yodali nia anda nasawen.
His grandmother said, "What did you do?"
Kagwiloka.
And Gluskomba said, "Me? Nothing."
Nia onda ozomi.
She said, "I know you. Tell me what you did."
In wawalmo kia kagwila.
I went across the fields, up the hill to the top of the mountain, found the wind eagle, tied him up and dropped him in a crack.
Nia pamosa kikonek ta aspigonda wawadzok ta meskawon wadzusen ta benitasen agama kadzigapskazo wadzoikok. Ombadalamo.
His grandmother said, "Oh, Gluskomba, don't you understand? We need the wind. Without the wind, the earth is not a good place."
Kiwal tam gluskomba in datsui kinlomsen onda wazanam kinlomsem yoaki onda oligan dali.
So Gluskomba went back outside, faced in the direction where there was no wind, and climbed to the top of the mountain.
Agama losa kwadzami mina ta logosa son sasagosa taon lawi onda kinlomsenui.
He looked down, saw the wind eagle still stuck, thought a moment, and then called out, "Uncle!"
Agama ida inzasis
The wind eagle said, "Who called me uncle?"
awani lui hlon nia inzasis.
And Gluskomba said, "It's me, Gluskomba. What are you doing down there?"
Nia the talker kagwi kia loka nidali.
And the wind eagle said, "Oh, Gluskomba, I'm glad to see you. A very ugly naked man with no hair dropped me here, and I'm not comfortable."
Mama sagiwi sanon ba benita sen nia yodali nia and da nuigon damwin yodali.
And Gluskomba said, "Uncle, I will help you."
Ta the talker ida come home indi damo inzasis nia kawizo kamo.
So he took the wind eagle and put him back on the mountain and untied his wings. But as he did so, he said, "You know, Uncle, sometimes it is good there should be wind, and sometimes it is good that it should be still."
Agama pedgi ponamen, agama nidali wadzok, ta ida sawi uwazonem kin lomsen, ta sawi onda uwazonem kin lomsen iwi.
And the wind eagle said, "Grandson, I understand."
Ta wadzusen ida gnosis inwaltam.
And so the story goes.
So the story.
Loka wongan losa.
Losa.
Betty Friedan ended her book, The Feminine Mystique, with the phrase, "A woman has the power to choose." The feminine mystique was a feeling that Betty Friedan and really everyone in the United States was feeling in the 50s and the 60s, that a woman should be satisfied with the two roles of wife and mother. And that should be sufficient for all women. And Betty, when she kept on encountering this, Betty, as then a magazine writer, a graduate of Smith College, was appalled. So she looked into it for 5 years. She did research, and her conclusion to the book was that a woman has the power to choose to do something else if she wanted to. Well, when she went places and talked about her book, it was published in 1963. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. It only fell off because her publisher was totally astounded that it was a bestseller, and they couldn't keep up with the demand. And so when the books weren't available in the bookstores, naturally the sales fell off, and then the books came back and it went back up. She sold 3 million copies in the first 3 years. And when she was making presentations, people would come up to her, just like you were saying, people came up after you tell stories and tell stories, people would come up to her and say over and over again, "Your book changed my life. I thought I was the only one who felt out of place." Now, her personal life then, well, it had been totally transformed by the book. She was a wife and a mother. She and her husband had 3 children. Her husband was a stage manager and so didn't have a steady job. And Betty, who had been brought up rather conventionally, always felt uncomfortable when she was making more money than her husband. Well, once her book was published, she was making a tremendous amount of money. In fact, they had enough money to buy an apartment in the Dakota Building on Central Park West in New York City. The Dakota Building where John Lennon lived and lots of other celebrities live. And they bought a summer home on Fire Island, which is off of Long Island. So it looked like this was wonderful. But that was only the public side of her life. The private side, her husband started beating her up. Another feminist activist, a friend of hers, later wrote, "It was common knowledge that if you were appearing with Betty Friedan on TV in those days, you had to show up early to help her with her makeup to hide her black eyes." At least once, her husband tried to push her out of a moving car. Luckily, a friend was driving by and saw what was going on and got it stopped and got Betty into his car, the friend's car, and drove her off. This friend happened to be a divorce lawyer and said, "Betty, when are you going to get a divorce? A divorce will stop all this." And she said, "I can't get a divorce. Smith graduates don't get divorced. I don't know anyone who's divorced." "Betty, you could have been killed." "I can't get a divorce." Betty stayed with her husband for 6 years after he started beating her up. I felt so sorry when I read that in her memoir, My Life So Far, that Betty could do so much for women in general and had a hard time fighting for herself. She decided after 6 years to finally divorce her husband because she was afraid the scar tissue around her eyes was going to become permanent. Some choices are hard to make.
And of course, you know, animals are animals. For example, there's a wonderful little story that Jessie tells, just a brief story, and we tell it just in Abenaki without even a translation, about Osban, who is raccoon, and Sagunk, who is skunk. Those are 2 words in Abenaki.
2 loan
came
words.
into English, 2
Right.
loan words. Why don't you just tell that quick version of that one?
A couple other loan words too. You hear skunk, obviously moose is an Abenaki word, and caribou is also an Abenaki word. All creatures that did not exist in Europe.
And wigwam?
And of course, you heard in the story,
That
means
was-
house,
And moccasin,
Moccasin?
means shoe.
toboggan. We could go on.
Yeah, jo on lokawangani da skunk ta asban pomosakasiwi ta asban ida nia in datsui na mitolowi kia giminga kanwa skunk ida kia anda in datsui ni nia giminga madzigen kanwa asban ida liulal damana na mitolowi kia giminga kanwa ska ida onda nia onda asban na mitolowi mina liula damana na mitolowi kia giminga kanwa skunk ida onda iauda asban na dodmawa agama liula damana na mitolowi kia giminga niga skunk quilbosa ta asban wakta sin ta kizoma hlon odzi sibok ta kizaba ado wieldzial niga yodali asban kizaba ado wieldzial odziali madzi mongwat odzi skunk ni ontloka wongan ni alets.
That's the story. Just to give you an example of what we'll be doing, these are two native flutes, and the flute is one of the three primary instruments. The fourth actually instrument is the voice, used by native people in North America. And well, let's just do this song, and then you can
Sure.
bring in the drum and say what it's about.
tak musíš čutovať. Vejvene tak musíš čutovať. Kjuta kve sisič čutovať. Kjuta kve sisič čutovať.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And that song is called Tutouage, which means little pine trees. It's a song that would be done by the parents for the children, especially the mothers singing, and the little children dancing around are like the little pine trees, protected by the boughs of the big trees from the snow and the heavy rain, so they can grow up tall and strong. So it's an intergenerational song. It's done by Wabanaki peoples, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Western Abenaki, Micmac, Maliseet, all throughout the New England area. There are different versions of that particular song.
This is a story called The Recital. When I was a kid, I used to have to play in piano recitals, which I hated, because I was never any good at playing the piano in front of other people. Besides, things were always happening to me in these piano recitals. For example, the recital I remember the best from 7 long years of piano lessons was the one in which I played a duet with a girl named Robin Franey. Robin Franey was my best friend at the time, and she was also my partner in a duet for 2 pianos, 4 hands, called Let's Have Fun with a Fugue. Now, when I was a kid, I'd never seen that word fugue before. I know now that it's a musical composition in which different parts successively repeat the theme, but at the time I had no idea. And I'd never seen it before. I didn't know how to pronounce it. And when I went home for dinner that night, my brother said to me, "What's the name of your recital piece this year?" And I said, "Let's have fun with a fug you." And he said, "Oh yeah, well, fug you too." But we went on to play it. And, well, the afternoon of the recital was a hot Sunday in late June. The auditorium was stuffy, airless, and filled with relatives. Now, one of the neat things about playing a duet in a recital is that you didn't have to memorize your recital piece. You got to bring your sheet music on stage with you. Now, the reason for that is that I believe is that it's when you practice, you and your partner can start together anywhere in the piece with these numbered phrases. So Robin and I were the only ones that were playing a duet in this particular recital, so we were the only ones that got to bring our sheet music on stage with us. So that afternoon, I walked on stage. There were 2 huge grand pianos. And I walked over to the left side, and behind it, on the left side piano, this is stage left, by the way, there was one of those tall, oscillating floor fans, because the auditorium was so hot and stuffy. And it was on, and it was creating a pretty powerful wind when it blew toward the piano, but at the time, I didn't think anything about it. I waited until Robin got to her piano, and then we both sat at exactly the same moment. We opened our sheet music just as we'd rehearsed, and readied our hands above the keyboard, and at a nod from Robin, we began to play. The first few measures went beautifully. Unfortunately, when I went to turn my page, that big old fan oscillated back my way and blew my sheet music right off the piano. I just sat there and watched it float into somebody's lap in the front row. I was so scared that my fingers kept on moving over the keys, playing random notes. Kind of like one of those chickens that keeps on running around after it gets its head chopped off. Well, when I pulled myself together, I realized that I would have to get my partner's attention as unobtrusively as possible in full view of a packed auditorium. Because you see, Robin, a model of concentration, had not stopped playing. And she didn't seem to notice that I wasn't playing with her. In fact, she didn't seem to be paying attention to what was going on my side of the stage at all. So, I decided to whisper across that huge expanse of grand piano. I said, "Robin, wait a minute. My music blew off the piano." She continued to play. Well, the audience was already laughing when I went to pick up my music from the man whose lap it had blown into. I brought it back, put it on the piano, opened it up, and decided to whisper a little bit louder. I said, "Robin, pick it up at measure 23. My music blew off the piano, pick it up at measure 23. I heard that she couldn't hear me over the noise of that fan. She was so scared by this time that she couldn't stop playing. Anyway, I panicked, forgot to whisper, and yelled over to her, "Damn it, Robin, wait a minute. My music blew off the piano. Pick it up at measure 23. The parents were laughing so hard it sounded like some of them were screaming. Robin kept on playing, and I was trying to pretend like I didn't just say "damn it" in front of the whole audience. When who should come out on stage but Sister Jerome, our music teacher. She went right over that big old fan and unplugged it, clapped her hands for silence, which even Robin heard, crossed down stage to the audience and glared at the audience until they stopped laughing, which didn't take long, turned to us and said, "You girls start that piece again, no more of your nonsense," and marched off stage again. It all happened so fast. She was like a miraculous vision. Robin was humiliated because Sister Jerome had to come out on stage and yell at us in front of the whole audience. And she blamed me for the whole thing. She gave me the dirtiest look I've ever received, nodded, and we launched once more into "Let's have fun with a fug you." Well, when it was all over, we played it perfectly, and the audience gave us the biggest hand of the day. I mean, they really loved it. But Robin was ready to kill me. She went back to her seat, sat down, slumped down, and started to cry. I, who couldn't play the piano anyway, secretly thought it was the best recital I've ever given. It was certainly the most well-received. In fact, Robin's father captured the whole thing on film with his home movie camera. And Robin never even invited me over to see it. Anyway, that was the experience that convinced me that I had a future on the stage. Any stage. As long as it didn't have a piano on it.
We'll play a song, and in hopes that it will lead well into this next poem. With thoughts of spring, it is now Sigwaniwi, which literally means the time of sig, which is emptying out. Speaking of how the rivers and the flows of ice would roll out and spring would come in, also would empty out, the cold would move to the north. So far, Pabun, or winter, who is considered a creature, like an animate being, has not yet gotten the point. So hopefully this song will help, and this poem that we're gonna finish with. So. Sing a song. They say that Sigwan comes from the south, and the beauty of his flute that he plays is so beautiful it sounds like the birds as he slowly moves to the north. So we hear those bird songs, which in fact inspire the music of the flute. And that attracts Summer, who is a young, beautiful woman who follows behind, listening to Sigwan, Spring, playing his flute, and eventually they camp together here in our land, and they bring with them that beauty of the first strawberries as well as the summertime. Those heart-shaped berries that represent its time for warmth, hopefully soon. And Kawatsui Nabiwi.
Uh-huh.
Wonderful.
Kizila nia natami ta kia nakwata nia natami. Alosada.
Let's go.
Kwai ni domba.
Hello, my friend.
Kwai ni domba.
Hello, my friend.
Ni domba.
My friend,
Pa kunongazian.
you appear new to me.
Kwai ni domba.
Hello, my friend.
Kwai ni domba.
Hello, my friend.
In namito kasizuk.
I see your face.
Nuli da honzi.
I am happy.
Pomosa an spiwi nia nekwombi.
Will you walk with me now,
Ni donba.
my friend?
Alosada.
Yes, let us go.
Adozigao zi namito.
There is much to see.
Wazonli kizi songabasop.
The snow is gone.
Mskiko askasquigen.
The grass is green.
Nikwombi kizos tsiga tsigualis lintoak.
It is the moon when the small frogs sing.
Uligen odzi pomosa spiwikia.
It is good to walk with you,
Nidomba.
my friend.
Uligen odzi pomosa.
It is good to walk
Ozomigaki siguan.
because it is spring.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round